Yep.
I'll go ahead and hit recording, and you are good to go.
Okay, so let's get started. What kind of things do you guys want to kind of cover? Last week was really good because Master Oliver went through 10 big things for you to really high level things that you need to focus on. And while they're high level, they're very specific. Uh, Make sure your price points are the way it is. That's the easiest way to really make a big difference. And not overthink. I mean, I think a lot of times when we go through these things, they're big points that we make for all you guys. I say all you guys, some of you guys, maybe we're not talking to you, but for a lot of you guys, we're talking to you. Um, they're big major points that for a lot of you, you struggle with. And the easiest thing, I hate to say it this way, is kind of to not try to overthink the problem. In some cases, we've had people that I don't want to say it this way, nobody on this call, but were just kind of dumb enough to just go do what we told them. And then it all worked out really well and their school went really well. And in some ways that helps a little bit, not trying to overthink the problem, not trying to overthink, well, how are my students going to react? What about this problem? What about that problem? How are you going to solve it? It's a lot easier in many cases with some of these things to make the improvement, implement it, and then deal with some of the ramifications downstream, because sometimes the ramifications either A, don't happen, or B, maybe it only happens once or twice, or it's not that big a deal to solve. Or we can solve it on the call here in a way that was a lot easier because we've dealt with it a lot more than some of you guys have. So anyway, that's just some things to think about. I hope everybody's really took those 10 things to heart. I hope you downloaded that form from, especially if you weren't at the meeting last week, I hope you downloaded that form from the Facebook group and went through those 10 things. And if you haven't, do that. Print that out, have it in a piece, live in a document, not just on the computer, and make some notes about how you're going to implement each of those 10 things for 2020, because it's going to make all the difference in the world. Some of our guys that have been with us a long time tuned into the quick start call. I know Jack D'Souza, Marty Callahan are here. That those 10 things are ones for you guys to go over too. And I give those to my staff as well, because we can keep pushing those points of the envelope as well. So anyway, with that being said, what kind of questions can we start with and kind of get working on today?
Yeah, so I have a question.
Go ahead, Jay.
So I've been going through basically the 50 different marketing opportunities, and a lot of that stuff is live events. So we're looking at hiring someone to do those for us. And I guess I was looking for some direction on maybe what kind of responsibilities that person would have, a good way to find someone who's willing to do that kind of thing.
Well, one of the things that I would say is when you're looking to hire somebody, a couple things to think about on this. When you're doing any kind of new activity, whether it's a marketing activity or not, in our live events, we kind of got nailed. If you go to the quick start menu, we show you the movie promotion script. And it's a really simple script. Whenever you do something like that, my suggestion is you always do it first with them. And so you're good at it. Because if you're not good at it, and then you hire somebody and say, well, I need to hire somebody so they can do these pieces of my business that I'm not, that's below me. I'm not saying you're thinking it's below you, but if you kind of defer that to other people, whether it's that, or you hire somebody to do sales, or you hire somebody to do something like that, it's really hard to manage them if you don't have the moral authority that when I go out and do an event, I get 95, 98% of the people to set an appointment, and I get all of them to show up at the school, and a lot of them enroll. So part one of that is when you do hire somebody or you do have somebody else do it, you can do it. And really anybody in the school can do any of these things. And frankly, those event things are so easy. I have 12-year-olds do it and they get 98% of the people to set appointments. Okay. So if the question is what kind of person to hire, is that the question? Or what do you do about going about hiring somebody?
Yeah, I think both of those questions, really. I mean, we've been doing those live events for 10 years, and we've had people go and help. But so I've got my experience with them, and we're happy to train them, but we've never really targeted anyone to do it for us.
Okay, just a little bit of a flag there. When you say you've been doing those live events, and you can stay off mute as long as there's no background noise while we're talking about this. Okay. When you say you've been doing live events, have you been doing them the way we suggest with the spin wheel, with the script that we're using?
Well, I haven't done them since I started this group. But we've been pretty close. I mean, like we used to invite people to break a board, try and get prizes that way.
Yeah, the break a board one doesn't work nearly as well. Yeah, so that structure is flawed. It doesn't work nearly as well. So we need to use the other system.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna switch over.
Okay, so I'm just
yeah.
trying to clarify to make sure we're on the same page on that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what kind of person to hire? The way that we do it, really, you can hire kind of anybody. I don't have really any lower threshold. I definitely would hire somebody that's at least assertive enough to go and talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the key point with any of the live events is that they have a little bit of guts, and it doesn't have to be a lot of guts, but they have to be standing in front of the booth with the spin wheel there in uniform. So even if they're not a martial artist, we stick them in a uniform. Doesn't matter if they're a white belt, and they're in a uniform and they go walk in front of the booth and say, hey, come on over, spin the wheel, win a prize. Come on over, spin the wheel, win a prize. And we literally practice that. We set the booth up in the school when we're training on it. We'll, and I think I posted a video on an empty school that I pulled 3 or 4 of my staff members together to kind of show how we do that. And we have the spin wheel set up. I think that day we didn't have the spin wheel because it was being used, but at the training that I videoed, and we set it up and we have them practice live. Come on over, spin the wheel, win a prize. And the other staff member practices coming on over and spinning the wheel and going through the process. So I really don't have any any very high threshold for that kind of helper. We've used parents before and they've done it. So that's a really easy one to hire for.
Okay.
You know,
are we talking about hiring somebody who's going to come out on weekends when you have something there, or somebody who's going to be in charge of marketing?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to get to next.
Yeah.
Well, and then, you know, so Jacob, specifically, what type of hours and structure are you looking to hire for?
Yeah, you know, I guess that's those are both good questions. I guess I need to nail down better. I mean, most of our events so far have been evenings and weekends. Mm-hmm. You know, and occasionally, like we have a $3,000 bouncy house that we sometimes can put up too.
Sure.
You know, so they would need to know how to manage those kind of things. But I guess to be honest, I was thinking, yeah, I guess right now I was just thinking about having someone I can basically say, hey, we've got live events coming up on these dates. It's going to be a movie theater. It's going to be a fundraiser. Go there and work the booth.
Okay. And again, the reason I ask is, and Master Moody, I agree with everything you said there, is having somebody who can go out and work the booth and do it effectively, assuming you train them ad nauseum on a very simple script. There's a wide range that do that, that can do that very effectively. You know, our Westminster school, until she went off to the Marines, is her 17-year-old or 16-year-old high school daughter was just knocking it out of the park. I mean, you know, 162 appointments in a weekend, 87 appointments in a day. I mean, just killing it. And so, you know, a lot of times somebody who can be very useful at that, a teenage black belt, you know, one of the moms in the school, a lot of times somebody that fits that profile without looking externally for somebody who has sales background or any of that kind of stuff, works just fine. On the other end of the spectrum would be like Greg Macy's example or Mina's example. For years, I had a full-time marketing person who pretty much only dealt with elementary schools. And we were doing so much in elementary schools, I had 2 different people over the years that would go and make contact and maintain relationship and set up after-school enrichment programs, set up PE Teach for the Day, set up carnivals and stuff like that. Greg has, with 3 schools, he has a full-time marketing director who doesn't work in any of the schools, but she goes and sets all that stuff up. And sometimes she's the one working the booth, or she's coordinating staff. So his people at the front line in the schools really don't have to worry about that. So at some point, you know, you look at, you know, what's the person I'm looking for? Is it I don't want to have my staff out all weekend at these things every weekend, so I've got to have some backup to cover it? Or is it when you get to a certain level, do I want to have somebody who's predominantly focused on that? Somebody who's a full-time marketing director usually is a multi-school scenario, where single school scenario, owner, operator, and or program director usually can do just fine on that.
Yeah, and I would also think, you asked the question to start, and maybe it's not the right question. If you need somebody to do this, is it because you have so many of these events you can't cover them? Or you're trying to plan so many events that you can't cover them?
Well, I'll be honest. I'm just sick of doing them, to be honest.
That's a reasonable response as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I know that this is going to sound a little weird, but those events are really the opposite of my personality, and they take a lot out of me. I do them, I get them done, and I do okay with them. But when I do one of those events, it just wears me out because of how difficult they are for me. So I'm trying to find someone who's a little bit more outgoing and just enjoys those things more. So
Jacob, not only does it not sound weird, Master Moody and Master Smith and I talk, periodically about birthday parties, and they both love birthday parties. I semi-despise birthday parties.
Yeah.
That having been said,
Yeah.
is we've done hundreds of them over the years in my schools. To the best of my knowledge, I've never been in one of the schools when the birthday party was happening. And we talk a lot about, and we all agree with this, about student Halloween parties, Christmas parties, various things that are referral events and so forth. And out of 5 schools or 6 schools, whatever year it was, I don't know how many parties, probably 4 or 5 a year per location. I've probably been to 2 of them in 35 years. So not only is it not weird, I can completely empathize with you. But what Master Moody said is right. You do have to make sure you know it well enough that you can train people on it, right?
Yeah.
And again, what happened in the industry a little bit was, the kind of the pretend consultants were telling people, you're a master instructor, go hire a program director who's a salesperson and they can sell for you. Well, that was always horrible advice, right? Because 1, you don't want to hand off the most valuable thing in the school. And 2, you can't hire somebody off the street to do something that you don't know how to do, that you're not proficient at, and you can't train them. So same principle as what he was talking about there. But yeah, no, there's no reason in the world you need to do that, right?
And it's not in conflict, though, Master Oliver. I just want to point that out. We're not telling you guys should do everything.
Mhm.
What we're just telling you is make sure you're proficient at it, and then hire away. And what ends up happening, the one danger is you're really proficient at teaching and you kind of like it and you're really comfortable with that. That's usually one thing you ought to hire away to do too, because one of the things that makes you money is doing marketing and enrollments.
Mm-hmm.
Those things make you money. So, it's kind of where you should prioritize your time and effort, maybe setting up the events, getting them ready, making sure there's enough of them. And then, have those guys do it. And then the job is to manage them to make sure they're doing it really well, keep really good track of the numbers. If you hire people to do it and they come back and they say, we got 2 appointments, then that's not good. But so what we're telling everybody here, especially if anybody hasn't done any of those kind of events, make sure you do it. In your case, you've done some of them. But if anybody hasn't done those kind of events or hasn't had success with them, make sure you at least know how to have success with them, because it's kind of hard to yell at your guys and say, well, you had a pretty big afternoon, a lot of people there, and you only got 10 appointments,
Mm-hmm.
or you got 40 leads and 2 appointments. You're obviously doing the script wrong. We need to practice.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have some moral authority in that kind of case. So,
Okay.
sorry, Master Oliver, I was.
No, that's exactly fine.
Yeah, we're not telling you guys you got to do everything. You just got to kind of be decent enough at everything. Make sure then you delegate out the stuff, and then make sure you're doing the stuff that's going to have the right outcomes and numbers in the end.
Yeah. Well, and mostly we're telling you that if you have systems rather than a personality-based school, you can make a decision on how engaged you are in each of the day-to-day processes. Everywhere from with one school being an absentee owner, with multiple schools being an absentee owner, to the other end is you're in there full-time every day. and you've got staff in there to support it. What I don't like it to be is that everything is dependent upon you, because then, worst case scenario, we had a client who went in for back surgery. He was supposed to be out for 2 weeks. He ended up being out for 6 months. The other end of the spectrum is if everything is dependent upon you, you can't, if you're making plenty of money, you can't do Maui for 3 weeks, because then everything comes to a grounding halt. So we want you to be able to take a vacation. And if a family member has a medical issue, if you have a medical issue, whatever, we want to keep the business humming along just fine. So
Obviously, so on the other side of the coin too, like Scott Sullivan, I mean, he had all those events set up and he had that mass exodus with the staffing. So he just scrambled and was able to accomplish and complete them all and did really well.
You bet. Okay. Well, let's start with, other than that question, questions or specific follow-up from last week. We really didn't get to Q&A or active discussion on that, but we were going through the 10 points that you need to do to be successful in the school, starting with price point, et cetera. Who has some questions or some follow-up from that from last week?
Master Oliver, this is Chris. I have a question.
Go ahead.
So we went back and we looked at how many leads we had in 2019, and we kept track of all of them, and we have their information. And I know Master Moody says, call, email, text. I was wondering if you could talk about the drip system. What exactly are you emailing them or texting them or email or calling them so we can continue to drip on those leads and try to get them back in here in January?
Okay. Well, let's start with the reality that unfortunately what happens is most school owners don't get to a lead or to an appointment quickly enough, and then they let them fade away. And reactivating their interest is much more difficult than getting them closed to begin with. Okay. So, and that's not the question you asked, but I'll start there. Is, for instance, if you have an online lead, whether it's a Facebook lead, a Google AdWords lead, a Google search lead, or whatever, what we know is you want to initiate a phone call to them while they're looking at the website. So what a lot of people do is they get the lead by email. Somebody comes in at 3 or 4 or 5, goes through email, starts trying to call people, which really could go back to probably 9 o'clock at night the night before, starts trying to get hold of people and follow it up. That's dysfunctional, right? It really has to be where online lead, text message goes to whoever's in charge of it, whatever day part it is. They initiate a call outbound, maybe not at 2 a.m., but any other time. They're initiating a call immediately, following what you were saying with Master Moody, calling, leaving a voicemail, texting, and sending an email. And clearly, the voicemail, text, and email can also be easily automated, and can be automated in what we call sequential autoresponder fashion, meaning they get an immediate response, they get a response in a couple of hours, they get a response in the next day, they get a response the following day, et cetera. So you can pre-program text, voicemail, email, and direct mail for follow-up, right?
Right.
And that's true of all levels. So if I do a birthday party, it's a huge different thing that I get permission slips and information and I wait and follow up on them versus I make an appointment on the spot. I go to a movie theater. It's a huge different thing between capturing the information and making an appointment on the spot, because the starting to follow up without having an immediate appointment, the ratio goes down dramatically. So far, so good. So on each of these different marketing pieces we're talking about, one big gap is just not, closing the appointment, getting them into the appointment, closing the enrollment up front. One of the things we do recommend, by the way, is schedule once, which will text them 4 times, email them 4 times to confirm the appointment, and then it'll let them automatically reschedule the appointment if they're not going to be able to make the assigned time. So, but going back to your question specifically, when you have a stack of leads that you haven't been able to get hold of, or maybe they came in for an introductory, didn't come in for a second introductory, or they didn't enroll, and you're following up, and I'll put this in the same category also as a student enrolled for a year and then they dropped out 3 months later, right? But the first key is keeping it a warm lead, not letting it go cold. So you've got to be constantly, repetitiously, and continuously following up on them, right? Where most people I see default is they want to do it all electronically. They don't want to do it all by like email, right?
Or a CRM system that is set up a preset lousy job of doing it. Like, not that any of these are bad, but one of these Rainmaker, one of these kind of Kicksite, one of these, which are all decent systems to use, but they default and abdicate to those kind of systems. Sorry,
right,
sir.
right, yeah, absolutely. So then the question is, if I want to immediately and continuously follow up on them, what's the best way to do it, right? So let me give you 5 or 6 scenarios. I had a birthday party last May, and then I had a movie theater promotion, and I have some leads that didn't make an appointment, and I have a bunch of people who made appointments that didn't show, and then I've got my list of people who took intros that didn't enroll. Well, one thing that I should do is realize the most effective way to make an appointment would be show up at their door, knock on the door, talk to them face to face. I'm not advocating that. Most of us aren't going to do that. I would do that for anything that's high leverage. So I'm going to show up at the elementary school and talk to the PE teacher. I'm probably not going to call the missing lead from show up at their doorstep for a missing lead from the movie theater, right? I've got a missing brown belt. I might show up and talk to them directly if I can't get them on the phone. But most effective is face to face. Second most effective is by telephone. What we know that has happened in recent years is the world has gone mobile. The nice thing about the mobile world and the online world is there's a ton of different ways to communicate with people. The bad thing is people don't answer their phone, or at least they don't answer their phone for a phone number they don't recognize, right? One of the ideas is Master Moody's. I always like to give credit where it's due. But one of the ideas that he had a couple years ago now probably is while you're out at the movie theater, while you're out at the live event, or when you're on the phone with them on the info call, sharing what's referred to as a V card. What a V card is on an iPhone or an Android phone is you can create a contact record. So you create a contact record for the school with your name, the name of the other staff members, the school name, each of the phone numbers that might have a outbound call initiated from, the email address, the mailing address. Now with your first contact with anybody, you share that contact information. If you're face to face with them, you say, hey, I'm going to share our contact information. This mobile number is your phone number. Great. Here, tap on it and just say add contact. Now we're in your phone. So if we're calling to confirm the appointment, you're going to know who it is. When you're coming down to the school, you have the address. You can just click it and do it on Maps or Google Maps, et cetera, right? Now, the reason I spend time on that is all of the telemarketing in the world gets sidelined by the fact that if they don't have your phone number in their phone, an awful lot of people don't answer the phone. It's gotten so bad that the Federal Trade Commission is telling people not to answer, or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is literally telling people not to answer phone calls if they don't recognize the phone number because of the spam thing, right? So I want to get into their phone as soon as possible so that at least if they ignore it, they know who they're ignoring. So far, so good?
Which is also for students too. You want your students.
Oh, yeah.
When they enroll, you want to have them put their contact information called the V card into their phone immediately.
Exactly. And so that's a starting point, right? Then the question is, if you have somebody who's been in your database for a year, 2 years, 6 months, whatever, what am I going to do to keep them warm and keep dripping on them and hopefully get them back in someday, right? And that's your specific question.
Right.
I always start with this. Again, I was going through the list of face-to-face is best, by telephone is second best, probably by text message is third, although I might make the argument that direct mail. But somewhere third is direct mail and text message to them. And then down the list is email. Down the list further is showing up in front of them on their Facebook feed and their Google feed, right? The last point at Google is called retargeting. At Facebook, it's called creating a custom audience of current customers, which literally means you upload their name, phone number, email address, Facebook finds them, and then you can show ads to them. Does that make sense? So, and by the way, if somebody shows up at a web page, Facebook has they call it a pixel. All it is an HTML code. Google calls it an HTML code. You paste that HTML code into your website, and then both of them will let you retarget that person. Facebook calls it showing ads to people who visit your website. Google just calls it retargeting, okay? So on that list of follow-up, you have retargeting on Google, retargeting on Facebook, which you can do if they show up on your website. You can do if you have their contact information, like from a movie theater. You have, above that, you have emailing them forever and repetitiously. You have direct mailing them, text messaging them, outbound telemarketing, and you have showing up at their door. Again, I rarely recommend that. We've had our program directors show up at the door to pick up a check for a big renewal, or maybe to track down an errant brown belt. But short of that, we really don't do that on leads. Okay. Now, what do you communicate with them? The first thing I would always put on my list is every event that you do at the school that you would think of as a referral event, invite your entire lead database to, right? So if I'm having a bring a friend board breaking day, a bring a friend movie night, a parents night out, if I'm having anything that's in that realm, a women's self-defense day, invite everybody in the database. Now, how would I, if I did this ideally, how would I invite everybody in the database? Well, I would send them maybe an email a day for 7 to 12 days. I would text message them a couple of times. I would ideally put somebody live on the phone to call them and invite them. And if they didn't answer, I would voicemail, text, email, right? I would send them a series of pieces in the mail. For this example, they might be postcards. They might be oversized color postcards. They might be normal postcards. But I would send them a few postcards in the mail inviting them, okay? And ideally, if you have it set up to be able to do this, I would retarget them I would advertise to existing audience of my current customers or to people who have visited my website on Facebook, and I would retarget them on Google, right? So then I have starting point one. I have a couple or three events that happen at the school this month. I invite them to all of those, and I do it through all the mechanisms available, right? So they get retargeted, they get email, they get direct mail. And by the way, don't leave out the direct mail because you think it's expensive, and default for email. Here's the stat to write down. Last I saw, the average human being in North America gets 185 emails a day. Is that about the number you remember, Master Moody?
Yes.
185 emails a day.
But I'd point out that's the old data when I looked it up last year.
Exactly. That's not current. It's only getting worse. The second thing to note is the average person in, I think North America, at least US, is getting 4 or less pieces of direct mail per day. So if I send them a big oversized postcard, compared to sending an email, which is more likely for them to see? Which is more likely for, and by the way, with a postcard, what happens is if they're at least halfway interested, I mean, I've got, these are our stuff, but they sit them on the desk, they put them on the refrigerator under a magnet, In my case, they get laid out on my desk, which gets lost, or they get laid out on the kitchen table, which may not get lost. But physical mail is much more likely to stay around and get them to take action on it than is digital communication. Okay? So number one, what I would follow up with them on is I would invite them to every event that you do in the school that's appropriate for referrals. That could be belt graduations. It could be black belt graduations. It could be a black belt show, spectacular extravaganza. It could be any kind of movie days. It could be the lower belt graduation that friends are going to come into. But I would invite them to all of them. Okay? Number two.
And I'd point out, Master Oliver, sorry, I would point out the beauty of a lot of this is these are not extra events you have to you can plan some very specific events for these people, but you're inviting them to events you're already having.
Already doing, yeah.
So it's not like a lot of extra work for you.
Go ahead.
Do you, for example, on these, we have an event on the 31st, a movie night. I'm starting to email them, starting to text them. Do you automate any of these things, or do you sit down manually and make sure that email, that text gets sent, every day?
Well, you can automate, set up, and just let run a new sequence for a new customer, right? So a new lead comes in, and here's going to be 6 or 8 weeks of what happens, right? As an example, for Martial Arts Wealth, you guys have been recipients of a lot of this, right? If we have a lead come in, the first thing it does is it sorts them by under 10,000 a month, 10 to 20, over 20, right? Then it treats them differently. And we're changing the 10 to 15, by the way. But if they come in and they're under 10,000, it shifts them down a pipeline where no human being is going to try to call them, where it gives them an option to buy the Fill Your School program, but that's it. So it has some follow-up text and email and so forth, and they get some mail follow-up. If they're over that 15 threshold, it kicks off where they get a postcard a week for 3 months, where they get a series of emails, and we're going to build that out more because there's not very many there. They're going to get an immediate text, an immediate voicemail. Then they get a series of texts and emails and voicemails from Jennifer. And there is no Jennifer, by the way, it's just voice talent that follows up on them. They get a package with the books in the mail. If they're over 20,000, they get a package with, used to be chocolates, but they were melting. So they get popcorn and a note card, right? All of that happens automatically. That's the equivalent of the new lead opt-in, right? And by the way, if a new enrollment is worth $6,000, how much money can you spend on a fresh lead if they're halfway decently qualified in order to get them to enroll, right? See, if you spend $1,000 to get somebody to enroll who is worth $6,000, you're fine with it, right? So there's a lot more things that you can do, that you can mail them in ways that you can spend money that wouldn't be there if you, if you just try to default to free or cheap. So far, so good, Sebastian? Then once you're out of that cycle, sure, you can pre-program, here's stuff that's going to happen in sequence, or here's stuff that's going to happen in April, here's stuff that's going to happen in May, here's something that's going to happen in August, right? However, what we know is, and again, I haven't finished the list, but you're going to do internal events in the school regularly to generate referrals. You're going to do internal events at the school regularly, you're going to do a Halloween party, you're going to do a Christmas party, you're going to do stuff like that, right? So since you're doing it anyway, overlaying, inviting all of the prospects gives you, double, triple, quadruple purpose for all those things. Does that make sense? Now, at any one time, you may have none or not very many of them show up for the Christmas party. But what you're doing is you're showing them all the exciting things that's happening at the school. You're staying in front of them. You're not letting them forget all about you. And you're showing them that it's an interesting and useful environment for the school. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think a lot of that stuff, I mean, I'm not sure if there's any value or any need to try to automate it, because what I do in April this year is probably going to be different than April of next year. And frankly, what I do on the third month of somebody being in my lead flow is going to be different depending upon when they came into the lead flow, right?
Yeah.
So the second element that I would do is, especially on peak times, is you go after them with the New Year's special. You go after them with the summer special. You go after them with the back to school special, et cetera, right? So if it were me and I had a database of 1,500 people, well, when New Year's hit, I would mail to them 6 times. I would email to them, probably times 5, so 30 times. I would put somebody on the phone to call them after the first or second piece of direct mail hit. I would text them all. And I would have advertising going on Facebook and Google for the, New Year's special. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So then as the year goes through, you have New Year's, back to school, et cetera. But every time you have one of those things, you go at them hot and heavy with a pure, our New Year's offer is this, and here's what we're offering, and come back in. So far, so good. The third thing that I would do is, I hear a lot of people talk from time to time. It used to be the big thing. Frankly, one of the things that NAPNA was founded on when John did it 17 years ago was a pre-done-for-you kick-in newsletter. And you got a new newsletter in the box, so you could add your own stuff, and you mail the newsletter. Well, my take on that is, I don't think a monthly newsletter going out to your current active students makes any difference whatsoever. And I'll give you an example. Steve LaValle, who was a close friend of mine, he used to do like a 16-page, full-color, beautiful student newsletter that he mailed to every student once a month. In contrast with my friend Keith Hafner, who had a much, 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 much better student retention rate. I mean by 300% better. Steve was dropping out 8 or 9% a month. Keith was dropping out maybe 3% a month. What Keith did is, this is really a dated concept, but if you remember the term mimeographed or Xeroxed, is he would just do a legal size paper, what's going on this week, and recognition, congratulations to this person, and special announcements, closures, etc. And so he'd hand out this piece of paper that was ugly. It wasn't full color. It wasn't, spent a lot of time on production, but it was current and it was relevant. And then what he would do is he'd print mailing labels for every student, and he'd put the mailing label at the top of the newsletter, hand deliver it to every student who took class that week. And then any student at the end of the week who hadn't gotten it, they would then put it in an envelope, hand address it, put a stamp, and mail it. Keith's version was very effective. Steve's version, in my opinion, was irrelevant. The amount of money and effort spent on the nice, elaborate, expensive one was a lot, okay? That having been said, if I was doing Steve's version, what I would do is I would mail it to every prospect, every lead, and I would mail it to every inactive student. And I've done a lot of research and watched a lot of different schools, and I have seen that works really well for reactivation, because usually when somebody drops out, something got in the way, and sooner or later they kind of miss having been there and regret that they dropped out, right? Nobody ever is happy they dropped out. So staying in front of them regularly, and by the way, all the other stuff we talked about, invitation, all the events and stuff, do that with every inactive student as well. So the purpose of a monthly newsletter that's going to work is to every inactive student and every prospect. If you did a weekly thing like Keith, which would be more effective, is mail that to prospects and mail that to inactive students. Okay? So now we have 3 things. We have a newsletter if you do it. We have inviting to all the different events that you do at the school. And we have periodically hitting them with some kind of offer to come back in, right? Somebody asked this in the Facebook group. I think it was Amanda Olson. But one thing that I always used to do as well, some of the direct marketers call it a drop-down offer, right? But when we would have an intro that came in that didn't enroll, is we would send them an offer, a week or so after they came in. But it would be like what you would think about today as a Groupon offer, or something like the Children's Hospital, the charitable fundraiser flyer, where we would send them something that was short-term and cheap, right? So something like 6 weeks, $99. Some portion of the people didn't enroll because they faded out of the system. Some people who didn't enroll because they didn't want to sign a 12-month agreement. Some of them didn't enroll because they couldn't afford or didn't want to afford what you're quoting them on tuition. So that kind of drop-down offer shortly after they didn't enroll, I always found was useful as well, right? So that would be everybody who comes in for an intro and didn't enroll, whether they came in for a first and didn't come in for a second, or came into a second and didn't enroll, sending them some kind of drop-down offer within a week or two, and then following up with that for 3 or 4 weeks. Does that make sense?
I like that idea.
So if you took those 4 things together, now you can be in front of them all the time, right? And the mistake to make is somebody gave you their contact information in August. I haven't followed up with them since, but January is a good time, so now I'm going to call them. Again, a dated reference, but that then is kind of like calling the white pages, right? If I haven't been dripping on them regularly so they remember who I am, they don't remember that they met me at a booth or whatever else it might be, came into a birthday party 6 months later, right? It's just as cold as the day is long. I know that's a long answer to a short question, but does that help?
Yeah, that helped out a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
That covered everything that I was asking about.
Yeah. And the
Well, and everybody, I mean, this is good for everybody. I know that we're answering individual questions here, but both of these things, everybody should have on their notes. Everybody, including our guys that have been with us a long time. I know some of you guys are, like the ones I mentioned before are on the call. Sorry to interrupt you, but this is, everybody doesn't have very solid prospect campaigns every month for the people that are, and again, I don't know if we clarified the difference between suspects, people that haven't ever raised their hand or had contact with us. We're talking about the people that have had some sort of contact with us. If you're not going back and continuing to work them every month like we're talking about, you're missing a huge part of what your marketing should be about.
Yeah.
Everybody should have that on their list.
Well, and one of the most effective marketing tools is now probably forever will be direct mail. And what happens now is that almost everybody gets enamored of online and digital. And the thing to remember generally is that the 2 things that make direct mail most effective, the difference between it working and not working, is list and offer. And you can add to that, number 3 is getting it read, right? Now, from a standpoint of list, the most productive list is those who have shown the highest interest that aren't yet enrolled, right? Or those who have been enrolled who have faded out, okay? So if I wanted to go do a direct mail campaign, I get this a lot. People say, yeah, I really am excited. You got me excited about marketing again. And I'm going to go do every door direct. And I'm going to sit and I say, wait a minute. Are we mailing to all of our current prospects? Are we mailing to the past prospects? Are we mailing to people who have faded out and aren't coming to class anymore? See, that's the most productive list, right? And the list is going to be most productive by recency. In other words, they came to a movie theater and gave you contact information a week ago. It's going to be better than they did that 12 months ago, right? So I always start with most recent and work my way backwards. And as long as I'm continuing to communicate with them, I'll do that for 2 or 3 years. I'm not going to give up on them. But recency, right? And to the degree that they've raised their hand, right? So where I want to start with direct mail is the list. And the best lists are people who've already expressed interest. And what most of us start with is going out to a cold market. And the way we approach the cold market is we draw a circle around our school and just say those are prospects. Well, even if you're going to go out to a completely cold audience who perhaps hasn't ever heard of you before, you want to be more selective than that. You want to look at income. You want to look at for kids, 2-parent households. You want to look at homeowners versus renters. You want to go through the list and hone into, see, my ideal market for the kids market would be 4 to 12 years old, homeowner, 2-parent household, right? That would be at the very least plus, and you got to look at income levels, but I would start with, say, 100,000 and up, then I'd go to 80,000 up, maybe 75,000 and up. I'd go down to a point where I have enough names that I'm going to mail, but I would look at income, homeowner versus renter. I'd look at freestanding home versus apartments versus condos or townhouses. So I prefer to have, other than maybe in like Ken in Manhattan and in Harlem, I would normally do freestanding homes, homeowner, income over maybe 75,000 a year, 2-parent household, age range for the kid, and then really target it in. See, I'd even be better if I took that same list and did Hispanic surnames and did it in English and Spanish, or any other kind of sort that I could do like that, that was really personalized and honed in to the exact audience I want. Does that make sense? Hey, and Ken, that's an aside, but what percentage do you have in Harlem that are Spanish speakers?
My second location is actually in Spanish Harlem. So
there you go. I would do as much as you can of material bilingual and targeting Hispanic surnames households with bilingual material. And you might experiment with some of it actually being purely in Spanish, not in English at all. There's a lot of data that shows that's going to bump the return rate quite a bit.
Yeah, that could work well for us.
Yeah. And by the way, I like that market better than most of the others. So, you know, I go after it strong.
Yo también.
Good. And I forget where I was going with that, but one of the most effective tools you have is direct mail, but you've got to have a powerful, that's where I was going, powerful offer as well. All offers, if at all possible, should be a powerful call to action, should be time limited. In other words, expires February 14th if it's possible. If you can't have it be February 14th because of the media, you make it something where it is, you know, free uniform for the first 10 to respond. You've got to have urgency and you've got to have a powerful offer. Now, I tend to default, and you can have arguments both ways, and there's different ways in different areas. I tend to default to free if I don't have some other reason for doing a paid offer. So you'll see, you know, the standard bearer for Mile High Karate offers is 2 free weeks, free lessons, free semi-private class with a black belt instructor, free DVD, free CD, free official martial arts uniform, and each one will have a value attached. $100, $50, $29, etc. So it'll build a value, it'll have a powerful offer, and then it'll have a deadline. Master Media, what would you add to those two things?
About the offers?
Yeah, and about direct mail in specific.
Well, I want to reiterate that you talked about whether direct mail is useful or not, and people just kind of keep shying away from it. And I keep hearing, oh, it doesn't work. And it's just silly. You know, you've got to use it not only for the prospects, but you really do need to use it for prospects, but in a lot of other ways. You know, even back to students, we send direct mail home when somebody enrolls so that they stay with us. We need to use it in lots and lots of different ways. And the cost for that compared to the return is very minimal. So, I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. You know, everybody just if you talk to a lot of people in business, they go, oh, direct mail doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work if you just blindly toss direct mail out at the masses and don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the most successful marketers in the world, in almost all cases, use direct mail.
Yeah, and I think it even works better now because a lot of people are shying away from it. You know, there's not quite as much mail in the inbox as there is in your mailbox as there used to be. So, but people still need to get mail. It's not like people don't get their mail.
Yeah, and if anything, Amazon has rescued the post office for package deliveries and so forth.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But I already said it, and I already backed up what you said about you've got to have something in your prospect campaign. But I think we probably should go on to like other stuff that I'm unfortunately for me, I get to pump off at one. But other things that people need to have in their marketing list to start off 2010. I think we said that in the last week with the 10 things that they have to focus on. Yeah. One of those is to have a Parthenon.
Right. Speaking of which, Master Moody.
You read my mind, sir.
Yes, I just posted this one in the Facebook group, and it says at the top, your martial arts school marketing Parthenon. So I just posted that while we were talking in the Facebook group. There are 3 different handouts that I know of in the Facebook group that are all very useful. One is called Marketing Checklist. The other is called Annual Marketing Plan. That's a Mile High Karate document from years ago. But the Marketing Checklist and this Marketing Parthenon are very useful. If you're on a computer where you can look, this Parthenon sheet I just posted. And the others are in there. We'll go find them and make sure you have easy access to them as well. The marketing checklist is very comprehensive and very good. We mail that periodically because I want to beat people over the head with it. And probably this month I'll mail this and the other one again, just so you can't miss it. But let's talk about this sheet, this Marketing Parthenon. And what I tried to do here on this, I created for our Quick Start meeting a time or 2 ago. But it really gives kind of a checklist of all the different types of stuff that you can be doing. And one of the things to anchor in from where you were going with that, Master Moody, is what we all want to have innately is what's the one thing I should do that'll fill my school every month? And a better way to think about it is, and there's a story of like the #1 chiropractor in the country, and somebody asked him, how do you add 40 new patients a month? What's the thing you do? The one thing you do to add 40 new patients a month. And his answer was, I don't know anything to do to add 40 new patients a month. However, I do know 40 things that'll bring me at least 1 patient a month, and I do all of them, right? And, I've said it in very inarticulate but direct way is, if you're not getting enough new students, you're probably just not doing enough stuff, right? Absolutely. And here's the thing. So if you look at this list, it starts with live events, and there's several people on the meeting today who've had huge results from live meetings. Willie, I remember last fall about our last Quick Start meeting, you did something, I forget what it was. What was that example?
Are you talking about the event that we had?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about 4 hours or so. We got like 114 appointments.
Yeah, outstanding. And Ken, you're our story du jour of movie theater marketing. But tell them your movie theater marketing with Avengers.
Yeah, over 2 weekends I had well over 300 appointments set.
Yeah. And in both of your cases, I don't remember what your ratios were. The only one I remember was Colby Winkler's from 3 years ago. But Colby's was 180 leads, 150 appointments, a tick under 100 intros, 54 enrollments. Then that 54 enrollments, that was in October. That was at a marathon. That December, that turned into 200,000 in renewals from that deal. Ken, I know when you did Avengers the first time, you were overwhelmed. I imagine your ratios weren't quite that. But what we know is once you get up to speed, and Willie, how are your ratios on that 4-hour blitz?
I can tell you off the top of my head, but we had about 15 or so signups.
Okay. The standard ratios for the live events should be 75% or more of everybody you interacted with. And Ken, I remember you were at almost 100%. 75% or more of the people you interact with should make an appointment on the spot. If you ever put somebody out there, going back to Jacob's question, if you ever put somebody out there who got 25%, that means you haven't trained them on the script of what to say when they say, I have to go look at my schedule, I have to go check with the wife or whatever. And it's a simple one. It's like, oh, I understand. We're going to be pretty busy next week. I don't want you to miss a slot. Let's pencil in something tentatively. Tentatively, would Monday or Tuesday work? And then usually it sparks a conversation. I can't do Monday, Tuesday. We got something going on. How's later in the week? We could do Wednesday at this time, Thursday at this time. Oh, I think we could do Thursday. And it just sparks that conversation. Then you get essentially 100% of them closed. Is that a fair recap, Willie and Ken? Okay. So, but it should be 75% or more, perhaps even 100% make an appointment on the spot. Half or more show up. I've seen as high as maybe 75, 80%. That's unusual. But at least 50% show up and at least 50% enroll, right? Now, there's a lot of variance, but on those kind of live events, and I'm just going through this quickly like I did last week, is the number one on the Parthenon, the thing where you can really get a huge flow of people is somebody else creates traffic of the right group and you get in front of them. Marathon, festival of some sort, taste of event, large multiplex movie theater that's showing Avengers Endgame or this spring Black Widow or something comparable, right? It has to be a blockbuster and it has to be a busy theater, but that's a home run. So moving down to the next one I have here, school programs. If you're looking at Facebook, I just posted it. Some of you have this physically. School programs. In the kids market, there's a ton of stuff you can do. My go-to back in the 80s was PE teacher for the day. We had done all kinds of demos and all kinds of stuff, and I figured out all that crap didn't work. But what we ended up with is we'd go into a school, preferably elementary or middle school, teach all of the PE classes. Before we went in, we would give out permission slips. We'd get 75 or 80% of them back. Then we would have phone number, mailing address, nowadays email address. And then what we added a little later on was a little checkbox of everybody who participates will get 2 free weeks of lessons and a free uniform. If you'd like us to contact you to schedule an appointment, check yes. We didn't have a no on there, but check yes. The reason we did is over the years is people started getting more and more sensitive about somebody calling them during dinner. And then we'd get blowback because they complained to the principal, and that risked us getting shut out. So we only called the ones that gave us permission. That ended up getting bastardized through Greg Silva into Barry Vanover as School Talks. But what happened when he did School Talks is he forgot the thing that made it work mostly was the permission slips, right? So that's one thing that, has almost a 40-year track record of working great. Then we morphed this into, and it was kind of working together with Steve LaValle, is he was doing an after-school enrichment program set up through the PTOs, and he would go into a school and get like 12 kids, but enroll most of them. And I looked at it and said, well, if I did my PE teacher for the day to promote an after-school program, could we do better? Well, he was getting like 1 or 2%. We ended up getting 20% of the student body in the program. So it massively exploded the results. So the second is an after-school or before-school enrichment program where you do PE teacher for the day to promote it, put out flyers in the Friday folders to promote it, and there's a whole list of stuff. There's 3 or 4 hours on this one thing, videos in the Facebook member site. But then it's do 2 lessons a week for 3 weeks or 3 lessons a week for 2 weeks and convert them all to students. Now, the other things you can do directly with elementary schools is what I come to call children's hospital flyers. When I gave this idea to Tim and Dave Cover, they ended up doing it for their local teen center. But what it is doing a partnership with a local charity, doing something that nowadays would be like a Groupon offer. Our go-to was $49 for 5 weeks and a uniform. 100% of the money we would give it to Children's Hospital. I was having printing these at 100,000 at a time, taking them to the district office, and they would put it out to the school mail in most of the districts around here. So we would bundle them in groups of 30, bundle them into elementary school envelopes with how many active kids they had in the school, how many classrooms, take them to the district office, they would distribute them for us directly. Sometimes we had to go to each individual school and have them distributed at the school level, but it was massive distribution practically for free. When I got the Kovars to do this, the first time they did all the schools in the area, and this is after years of telling me you can't do any of this stuff in California. You just don't understand California schools. They were getting so much traffic, they had to start breaking it up and only doing like a quarter of their schools at a time to break it up, right? So there's 3 things at elementary schools. A 4th thing is any event that they do where the parents are there. So a lot of times in fall, they have an Oktoberfest or they have a Harvest Festival. Sometimes they have a Thanksgiving or a holiday event. In the spring, they may have some kind of spring festival. But anything they do at the school where the parents are there, you treat it just like any other live event. Set up a booth, maybe bring mats and do a little intro class, but you get their information, you make an appointment on the spot, and you go from there. One example of that, and there's 2 videos on the Quick Start member site at the top of me talking with Jan Lappin in one of our meetings. She got 100 enrollments in 6 weeks last year, meaning 2018, and I think 87 appointments in 6 weeks in 2019 from back to school days. All of the pieces in there are in that recording. So any kind of event that they do like that, but certainly that's one example. There's some other things we could talk about, but I want to kind of keep going here to hit a broad brush today. The next is business to business marketing, not meaning you're trying to market your services to that business, but you're using other local businesses to help promote. One of the easiest things, and there's 3 hours on all this kind of grassroots, inexpensive stuff, by Master Smith in your member site, by video and by audio. And if you got the big packet, it's in there too. But one thing you can do is rack cards. Rack cards are literally, it's a trifold brochure holder that you can put trifold brochures in, or you can put, well, we've come to call rack cards, wherever that came from, Jimmy Mack or somebody. You can put in a card that's the size of a trifold brochure without folding out, usually full color, and distribute those to local businesses. Now, where people get lazy on this is they print them up and they put them in 4 businesses in their shopping center. In order to be effective, you want to get 200, 250, 300, 350 locations out. It is incredibly easy to do. There's a gentleman in the industry, he's a friend of mine, he's a nice guy by the name of Jimmy Mack. He'll come do it for you. And I've talked most of our franchisees over the years into doing that because I wasn't getting them to do it otherwise. But what happens is as soon as you follow him around, you figure out that it was stupid to have paid him to come do it because it's so easy. Literally what you do is you take them and you take a ride out your front door and you hit every business, everything from the dry cleaners to the orthodontist to the chiropractor to the Domino's Pizza, et cetera. And you just start going, Dairy Queen, and you just ask them if they'll put this thing in here. And usually the conversation starts with, hey, I'm the owner of the martial arts school, or I'm the program director for the martial arts school over here. We're looking to work with local businesses to help co-promote. Anytime you have coupons or anything you'd like us to give out to your students or to your customers, we'd love to do that. Any special events and things you have coming up, let us know, and we'll promote them. By the way, we've got a big email list as well we can do that with. And in the meantime, I was wondering if you would mind sitting this here, to help us a little bit as well. It's really that complicated a script. And if you go hit 200 businesses, probably 150 of them will say yes. And then you just have to go back every 4 to 6 weeks and refill. So you want to keep track of where they're at. If you just take a right out the door and go down and keep making concentric circles, it's pretty easy, because next time you go to refill, you just do the same circuit. Anybody who doesn't have one, you ask them if they're do it. And the only secret to making it work is powerful offer and changing the look at the card periodically. Because if somebody's going into Dairy Queen every week, they stop looking at it if it looks the same every week. So you want to change the look of the card. We've seen, a couple hundred locations, good for 3 or 5 or 3, 4, 5, 6 enrollments a month. Super easy to do, costs like nothing. The card holder, if you get an inexpensive ones like 75 cents, the printing on the cards, you can print 10 or 20,000 at a time, is inexpensive, and it's super easy to do. Next on the list is working with Pizza Hut, Domino's, all of that stuff to put flyers on the box. And I don't mean somebody's doing it already and you pay them for a little slot on advertising. I usually would do something like the Children's Hospital thing, where it's a charitable fundraiser, and then ask them to put up a poster in the window and ask them if they'll distribute the flyers on their pizza boxes. And I've done that very effectively, where we did with McDonald's. This was Don Southerton's idea. We did tray liners at McDonald's and put advertising cards in the bags at drive-through as a charitable fundraiser for the Ronald McDonald's House. We did the same thing with Burger King's as a fundraiser. At the time, it was the literacy program. I'm not sure what their current pet charity is, if any. But we've done that at different restaurants. And by the way, Chick-fil-A is super easy to work with. And they periodically have, most of the restaurants, a family day. So you can do coloring pages that they distribute. You can set up a booth and talk to people that drive through. They're very easy to work with. The other one that's easy to work with, as long as it has a charitable tie, is Walmart. They'll let you come in periodically and set up a booth out front and so forth. So when you look at the Parthenon, you have live events, you have school programs, you have grassroots marketing things like rack cards, bandit signs, big banner on the school and so forth. The only secret on that stuff, whether it's a banner on your school or rack cards where people are going to see it a lot, the only secret is every 6 or 8 weeks change it. Have a banner with a blue background, have a banner with a yellow background, have a banner with a 2-week offer, have a banner with a 4-week offer. Rotate it periodically, because if you leave the same thing up for more than 6 or 8 weeks, everybody starts ignoring it after they've seen it a few times. So far, so good? Questions on any of this stuff so far? And again, I'm kind of repeating last week and going through quickly, but I want you to get the idea that every month you should be doing 20 things to generate enrollments. And if you're not generating enough enrollments, most of the problem is you're not doing enough stuff. The second element is you haven't put enough things in the mix that have the potential to be a home run or a grand slam, right? So you've got to have some of the big events, or you've got to have an after-school enrichment program going on, or you've got to have a big dollar Facebook advertising campaign going on in the mix to get all this stuff to really kick butt. Questions so far? No? You guys are a quiet group. I guess if I get going fast enough, it's hard to get a word in edgewise. The next item on the list is internal promotions. Let me give you a benchmark. Benchmark number one, anytime I've stepped in and run one of my schools, I was adding half of the kids, adding mom or dad to the enrollment. So if I had a class of say 30 kids, I would have another 30 to 40 parents in the class. 30 to 40 because some of them were mom and dad, right? So one benchmark for internal is every intro you have mom and dad, and of course siblings, but have mom and dad take the introductory class with the child. And then you should be able to at least 1 out of 2 of the kids add mom or dad to the program. Obviously, it helps when you're doing the family enrollments, because if you have 2 kids that you're enrolling, mom or dad are going to be for free. And when you do that, sometimes you wonder, well, why do I want mom or dad? Because they're not paying any extra. Well, I'll tell you what happens with kids and with the adult market is if the kids have the parents, the retention goes way up. It gets a lot better. The renewal rate gets a lot better. The level of engagement gets better. The number of referrals you get gets better. All of those things improve. So it's not just the revenue per head. It's all of the other things that are valuable as well. Does that make sense? The second thing is referrals. And around our industry, and I may have been the first one to do it. I don't know, because I had worked for 24-Hour Fitness. You know, I remember Tommy Lee came from Bally's, but they were, you know, the fitness industry was using guest passes, and I stole that in '83 and started giving all our students guest passes. And, you know, so it seems like most of the people in our industry started thinking eventually that was like the key way to get referrals. But I'll tell you what I found. You get referrals mostly from a big live event where a bunch of your students bring 1 or 2 friends each, or a live event where your student brings 20 or 30 friends, right? The first is Ninja Night, Board Breaking Day, Movie Day, Parents Night Out. You can go through the list, Women's Self-Defense Day, etc. So you want to have things targeted at different age groups where they're going to bring 1 or 2 friends each. But the other one is birthday parties, pizza parties, things like that. The pizza party deal, probably first came from us. Toby actually put it together, or Bob, I forget which, Toby Milroy. But it's basically you take a birthday party and you give them a birthday party when it's not their birthday. New student enrolls, and we're going to schedule a pizza party to celebrate them getting their gold belt. Any other special occasion. One thing that makes birthday parties work is you've got to have a lot of them, and you got to have an effective system for converting. We won't talk a lot about that right now. But the other thing is the schools I've seen that did the best on birthday parties is the day they enrolled, they include the cost of the birthday party with the initial enrollment, and they scheduled their birthday party on the spot. So it didn't matter whether they enrolled them in January and their birthday wasn't until August. They inked the date in on the spot, scheduled the birthday party, and had it on the calendar. But then the problem with birthdays is if I roll them in January, I don't want to wait till August to have a referral activity for the student. So then you add the pizza party thing in to bring their friends down to celebrate their gold belt test or something similar. Does that make sense? And by the way, we have a full program on that. I don't know if, Bob, you're with us, but I forget what it's even called. Bob, what's the pizza party thing called?
Ultimate Referral Machine.
Ultimate Referral Machine, completely formatted and everything in the member site. We also have that ambassador program thing that's a referral generator. But the thing to remember on referrals is most of the referrals you get are not asking for them face-to-face, although you want to do that, not giving them out a stack of guest passes, but it's to have an event where one student brings 20 or 30 friends, or an event where most of your students bring 1 or 2 friends, right? Next on the Parthenon here is publicity and PR. Stands for public relations. This is something that most people are terribly deficit at. And, Jeff Smith and I came from Jun Rhee, from his lineage and from him directly as students. And he was perhaps the best person who ever lived in the martial arts industry at publicity and PR. And he was close friends with Muhammad Ali, who was perhaps the best athlete ever at generating publicity and PR. And most of you are too young to remember, but Ali really first claim to fame is people would pay to see him lose because they didn't like him. Kind of like Mayweather, I guess, nowadays, or who's that pain in the ass MMA guy. But one of the things you should be constantly looking at and aware of is ways that you get into real media, ways that you get on TV, ways that you get on the radio, ways that you get into the daily newspaper, as well as anything else you can. I mean, if somebody has a parenting blog in the area, getting on the parenting blog, if they have a big following, may well be useful. But you want to be pursuing publicity and PR. And most real media, the thing that'll happen is, one of several things. You tying in directly into news that's in the news currently. So something happens that's getting everybody's attention. What happens is the media, especially like radio, TV, and newspaper, they're looking for somebody who's an expert, and they're looking for related stories, right? So you watch the news that's going on and figure out how you can tie into that. Number two, you really get to know all of your students, really get to know what their interesting backgrounds are. I'll tell you one example. We had a gentleman by the name of Howard Bush. I posted a picture of an old poster we did, and it was Howard was like, 86 years old when he got his black belt. And we had a kid, Alex Pania, who was, 5 or 6. And it had the two of them together. But we got tons of press on Howard because he had a really interesting background. He was one of the original, it's not SAS, I forget what it's called, but like the precursor to the CIA. So in World War II, he's one of the guys who was parachuting behind enemy lines. And he had been an amateur wrestler in college. And he had this long, interesting resume. So he was a really interesting character study of this guy who had been a wrestler and a boxer and SAS member and all this stuff. And now he's 86 years old and he's still a working realtor and he just got his black belt in karate. So we had full page and inside 3/4 page on a young lady who had leukemia and, chemotherapy, had lost all of her hair, everything else, but she got her black belt. So interesting human studies. We had lots of publicity over the kid who was the poster child for cystic fibrosis and how martial arts was helping him and all of the tie-in and the family stories. So you look for interesting stories. We had a 14-year-old girl walking home from school and somebody pulled up in the car and grabbed her by the wrist, looking to pull her into her car or their car. And she was tuned in enough to punch him in the nose and break the wrist lock and run away. That one got to the Montel Williams show. It got in the Rocky Mountain News, the Denver Post. The mayor of the city brought an award and presented her. It got on the ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox affiliates locally. All of it at the martial arts school, all of it in uniform. We even threw an article into Black Belt Magazine and Taekwondo Times for that one. So you're looking for interesting stories, and then you're going to the media with those interesting stories. Does that make sense so far? The third element on PR and publicity is make yourself a local star. That's one of the things, if you watch, Amanda Olsen is doing a really good job of. Olga Keith is doing a really good job of. So make yourself a local star. Get out there into the media. Really do all kinds of things. Amanda is doing it as Master Mom, but get out there into the media and really get your name out there, get your presence out there, and get going with that. Is this making sense so far?
Sir, yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Master, can I have a quick question with you on that? I'm doing that right now. I was able to participate in one of those TED Talks here in Frisco.
Great.
And apparently, according to parents, were 3-year-old kids who were happy. I apparently gave it a lot of credibility. And I was invited to these meetings with these other people, and they invited me to do a podcast and all kinds of stuff. And I want to know, how can I, when you said approach the medium, when you say approach the media, how do you approach them? What are you selling? Because I'm going to go to these places and I don't know what am I going to tell them. I haven't, I guess, really done my homework, but I wanted to know what you would say.
Yeah, and this is a topic that we can go much more in depth with when we have more time.
Mm-hmm.
But let's take that specific instance, right? What did you talk about on your TED Talk?
In the TED Talk, it was the first one in Frisco, and we did a martial arts demonstration, and then I spoke about the school's philosophy, what we call the way of the heart.
Okay.
And I talk about courage and how to control emotions and feelings and how to be a good mirror for the world. And people really, really liked it.
Okay.
So it was, and we did more martial arts, boards and swords. And we got in a piece with the Dallas Morning News and the community impact.
Oh, so you've already gotten some press.
Yeah, already. So that's working well. But I want to convert that into leads, which according to our numbers and percentages, that's still the thing that we're working on.
Sure.
But that's what we have going on the most right now.
Well, again, I think this is going to merit. This is going to merit an hour, but the short answer is newspapers have different editors that have different responsibilities and different writers. And you should be able to go on their website and drill into their staff and find out who is a writer on relevant topics. So there might be one who's, family issues, another one that's sports, another one that's health and fitness, right? And so you want to get to, national politics, nothing that you just said ties into national politics, local politics, regional politics, but it ties into health and fitness, it ties into sports, it ties into family, right? So go to the editors that are relevant for what you're doing. There's probably a contact method there. We used to always get to them by fax, and nowadays it's likely going to be email, right? But you find their contacts and, of course, create a database for yourself of this to go back to them over and over and over again. But you go to the person in the TV station, you go to the person in the newspaper that's specific for that, okay? And TV is different than newspaper, right? Is TV, what they want is something that's visual, or they want somebody who ties in directly to current news going on. Radio is similar in that not visual, but if there's some news going on and you can tie into that and then be the expert, it's an easy entree, right? With what you have there is getting the TV, the video, and then having some other event that they can go. When I was a promoter with that big national tournament, we got a lot of TV, because what happens on Saturdays and Sundays is there's literally somebody driving around in a van with the camera on their shoulder, metaphorically, with the camera there, sometimes a satellite uplink, looking for something interesting to put on the news. So if you're in Frisco and the building downtown burns down, you're not getting on TV. But if there's not something else that's interesting going on, it's easy to get them to show up at something that sounds like it has visual appeal. Does that make sense? So what you can do is you can take the video and you can send it to them with a story idea. You can share it with TV with some other. See, they're not going to want to put the video of the thing that used to that happened a long time ago, right? When it's current, and it's still pretty current, you might be able to get them to pick that up. But as it gets a little older, you're sharing it, but with the idea of here's something coming up that you could film and could be on TV, right? And again, on that, I'm butchering the subject. It merits at least an hour, if not, more than that. But does that give you some starting point?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah.
I want to follow up in the steps of Master Mom over there. She seems to be doing what she's doing. So let's keep going.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different ways to get publicity. I will freely admit that it's one of the things that I haven't been as active on over the years as I should have been, especially having, fed from the silver spoon from June Rhee on it. But we've hit some huge publicity coups. Sometimes I figured out we had the CFO for the Denver Broncos or the marketing director for the Denver Nuggets, and we had a tie into the major sports teams. Other times we figured out we had the president of a $780 million electronics chain and did something with them. Another one, we had the like the top weather newscaster in the city. So we did like every day at noon, he came into the school and we did a lessons, and at the end he earned his white belt. So a lot of times it's just knowing your student body, and you either find really interesting stories or you find people who are attached to the local TV, newspaper, radio, etc. And then you find ways to, or with other companies that you can work with. Does that make sense?
Sounds good.
Yeah, on that note, we're going to have to wrap up pretty quick. I just got started on our little checklist, and I know I've done it pretty quickly. This checklist, the more comprehensive marketing checklist and the much more comprehensive annual marketing plan is all in the Facebook group, and I believe they're all in as well, your member group. So go take a look at that. And remember, you all have access to that, that Complete Fill Your School program. But within it, there's about 3 hours that are really good of grassroots marketing with Grandmaster Smith. On that note, if there's any last question, we'll field it. Otherwise, Benjamin, welcome, Benjamin. Benjamin, do you have a camera?
No, I don't.
No? Okay. Well, everybody wave to Benjamin since he's not going to be able to. Can you see us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Everybody wave to Benjamin. He can see us. We can't see him. That's very unfair. And welcome, Benjamin. But on that note, we'll call it a day. Benjamin, stay put, and we'll catch up here. And for everybody else, any questions you have, I went through a lot of this fast. Post it in the Facebook group. I'll get right back to you, or Master Smith will get right back to you. Master Smith is, as we speak, running a little seminar in Portland, and tomorrow we have one in Seattle, and then Monday in Vancouver. And then make sure you're going to be here for the Quick Start meeting live a week from tonight, behind the scenes at the Westminster location, a week from tomorrow and Saturday here at my home in Evergreen, Colorado. Thanks, guys. So Benjamin, don't go away.
All right.
But welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And I guess you haven't had the pleasure of talking with Master Smith yet, right? Because he's traveling and teaching.
Right.
Well, fantastic. Bob was giving me some background information, but catch me up. Where are you at? What are you trying to accomplish with your school?